Well, the idea of divine humanism, this is a term that has been used for many generations already, but I think that nowadays it takes a very updated expression and a very necessary one. How to approach and conceive the divine in human terms, and how to conceive the human being in divine terms, and how to bridge the gap between the two, and what's the place for divinity in humanity and the place for humanity in divinity. All the things are very interesting challenges that should consume, ideally, the minds of sincere hankerings of the truth, hankerers of the truth. So, to be human, let's start from us. To be human is a big challenge in itself. Sometimes we hear this concept of existential crisis and how this visits our human journey. We generally do not see this expressed in such a deep level in other species, such as the less complex form of life, as animal kingdom, like this. But in human beings, we actually, not only we perceive some temporary existential crisis, but we may say, I may say, that human life is in itself an existential crisis, not in negative terms, but crisis implying discerning. The very word crisis, coming from the Latin and the Greek, implies this, a situation when discerning and decision making is mandatory. You have to do that. So of course you are situated in a situation where we need to take a new decision with all the risk, if you will, and fear that it implies. So human being is in itself an existential crisis, in the sense that it's a constant situation that invites ourselves to newer and newer progress. In Darwinian terms, the survival of the fittest, mutatis mutandi in Latin, jivo jivasya jivanam in Sanskrit. Just whatever language you will like, but the point is, life is in itself a dynamic affair, something that is constantly moving, constantly evolving. Even if we want to speak in transcendent terms, let me go there for a while. If we want to speak on a spiritual level, we may speak about something that is always existent, always transcendent, always omnipresent, omniscient, etc. So on. But at the same time, according to Eastern thought, that very same reality, which is absolute, immutable, it's constantly expanding and developing, because that's the nature of love itself. And spiritual reality is composed of atoms of love. So naturally, everything is naturally expanding more and more. This paradoxical feature of love, that means it's self-satisfied, it gives full satisfaction to whoever may taste that, but at the same time it gives some sort of transcendental dissatisfaction, in the sense that you will always feel, I want more, I need more. So that's the progressive nature, dynamic expression of spiritual reality. And we have also a glimpse of that in this world. So human being has a lot to do with that, because at least according to Vedanta, devotional Gaudiya Vedanta, the school I'm part of, the ultimate potential of human being fits perfectly in the context of the divine and love divine. So it has to do with a constant invitation to unlimited progress. That's a very high, let's say, challenge. Try to imagine you are entering into a land where there is no limit to your progress. I mean, you have to really be disposed to live such a lifestyle. But that's the most beautiful thing we can ever imagine. So that's the ultimate potential of the human being. So in our daily situation here, maybe not so much connected with the divine, we are starting to have a glimpse of that in the connection of our daily existential crisis. Some type of question, inner question that always is sounding there, and the question that primarily appears in human life is why. Why am I? Existential crisis. In other species, again, less complex forms of life, the question will be more connected to the how. How to eat, how to mate, how to defend myself, how to survive, how to sustain my situation on a physical level. Not even psychic considerations are there in a deep way compared to human experience. What to speak of transcendent ones? There is a soul, according to Vedanta. There is a consciousness in those species as well. But consciousness has not really reached the surface and have a glimpse to its own potential, as in human being it does. So in human being we have this why question. But when we endeavor in the direction of the how question, and we ask this question in excess, how to do that, how to develop the answers to those questions, eating, defending, mating, and trying to create much and much more comfortable experiences in that regard, the parallel result with that is a bigger existential crisis, a bigger level of dissatisfaction, and so on. Mainly because we are not properly paying attention to the question that is concerning us as humans. Why? So you can try to fly in the sky as a bird, you can try to reach the depth of the ocean as a fish, but actually that's mainly connected for the bird and the fish. As a human being, you should fly high in the sky of transcendent experience and go deep into the ocean of your own consciousness. And that's connected to the why question. So because of this, the famous Vedanta-Sutra, one of the main treatises of Indian tradition, full of aphorisms, the very first line says this, Atato Brahma Jignasa, which means now, Atato, Brahma Jignasa. Brahma Jignasa means it's the moment to inquire into Brahman, into the absolute, into the spirit, into the soul, into yourself. Now is the moment, Atato. Now that you can read these lines, it means you are a human being. At least you have a human body, because to be a human is a different thing. So now that you have received this particular vehicle, the purpose, the ultimate purpose of that vehicle is to inquire into the why question. Of course, you need to inquire into the how question on a certain level, and you'll need to solve some relative, if you will, necessities, physical and psychic dimensions. You have to have them in balance, but in order to create the proper platform from which make this question why. So make all the necessary how questions, but only in the context of creating the proper platform for starting to ask this powerful why question. For that you need a powerful ground, because the why question is very powerful, and the answer to that is much more powerful. So the ground has to be powerful enough to sustain yourself. So you can ask yourself all the how questions you need, solve all the relative psychic physical problems in that regard, but the idea of that is start to ask the why question, and there are so many layers and levels for that question and for the answer to that question. So in this sense we are speaking about the purpose of human, of being human. So being human, again, it doesn't mean just having a human body. Being human, the very term says human being. Being means it's a verb also. So to be human, when you say to someone, please be more human or be human, you know what I mean. You know what you mean. Or when you say that was inhuman, it means you generally do not say that was inhuman and you speak that to a dog or to a cat. You do not speak to an animal and are accusing him of being human. You say that to a human being that is not acting as what it should be. So basically, first we should be human. First we should humanize humanity. That's in itself a big endeavor, a big challenge for humanity as a whole. How to pay proper respect, give proper honor to the vehicle that we have received. How to be humans. Interestingly, the word human comes from the Sanskrit term. Sanskrit is the oldest language on earth, for the term Manu. Manu is a pretty ancient sage who wrote a very classical treatise called the Manu Samhita. So Manu Samhita means a series of laws for humanity. So when you pay close attention to that treatise, you really understand what does it mean to be a human in a very virtuous way, in a very ethical way, how to be a good citizen, a good member of society, of your family, and all these different values that makes oneself a good human being. And from that platform, as sometimes we say, reach an equilibrium, a state of well-being, a state of balance through which you can have a glimpse of the beyond, of who you can be, even beyond your humanity, when you start to deify your humanity, to invoke divinity into your humanity. But first, of course, we need to harness our animal side, if you will, to properly domesticate the beast that sometimes is still within us. So this system called Varnashram, the social Indian system of engagement, conceptual orientation, or how every member of society may engage themselves in a balanced way, in a satisfying way for them, that's creating this horizontal development, this ground from which one can have a look, a clear look upon transcendence, upon oneself, projecting oneself into one's own existence in transcendence. So first we have to humanize our humanity, but after that we have to make our humanity divine. So that's a very important point. And how to do that? How to make ourselves divine? Because as humans, we know we are very connected to this ideal of vulnerability, fragility, imperfection. And when we say divine, immediately we will think of God, of divinity. And God represents the exact opposite, in one sense, of us as human. We could conceive as such. God is perfect, not fragile, omnipotent, and so forth. So that contrast may create a big gap between God and ourselves in such a way that we may not feel enough strength, enough empathy, enough connection to feel we have something in common and we can establish some link between the two. So that's a very necessary thing to solve. We may feel God is not too close to human experience, and I'm not too close to God's experience. Of course, we find a very nice bridge in Christianity, in the form of Christ, being God appearing as His Son, experiencing the suffering of the whole humanity as a way of the redemption, and in this way allowing humanity to connect to transcendence, to this particular manifestation that comes to gap the bridge between divinity and humanity, fully divine, fully human. Also, interestingly, in the Indian traditions, in my case I'm representing here, we find different expressions of this very same principle of divine humanism, as we labeled the talk. One of them is the principle of Shastra, or the scriptures, or divine revelation. When we say Shastra, we are saying the divine message appears in the world from time immemorial, and people can have a connection through the divine, and that message appear as a guideline for humanity here from time immemorial. Also, another principle is avatar, which means divine descent, or God appearing in this world, not incarnating, not taking a body made of flesh, but appearing beyond the laws of this world in order to redeem this platform. So avatar also could be expressed as an emotional moment in the life of the Absolute. God taking a particular form, appearing in a particular circumstance with a particular purpose. We also have the famous principle of the Guru, of the spiritual preceptor, which implies a soul, a human being, but fully surrendered to the divine's will, fully aligned with God's will, and in that sense acting as a channel, as a portal, of what God's expressing to humanity. And that person will be a perfect example of what we should become. A guru will be our own potential appearing before us. So it's a very interesting particular idea. I cannot develop that here. That's not the topic of this talk. But I wanted mainly to connect to the idea of God himself, taking a human-like appearance in order to approach the finite, or infinitesimal souls from the infinite plane. So sometimes we think of God mainly connected to us. This is a very important point. When we think of God, we think about some cosmic administrator, and that mainly is dealing with us here. So, okay, that could be a quite anthropomorphic concept, because we are here. So because I am here, this world is the most important, and because I'm here and this world is the most important, because I'm here, God is mainly concerned with me here. But that not necessarily has to be the case. In the Indian tradition, we find a very interesting idea that God has his own world of love, his own personal life, but at the same time, in that world, in that life, he's pretty much human-like. So in that sense, when you say God, he has his own life, and in one sense he's not so much concerned with the dealings of the temporary realm, you may feel, oh, he's quite far away. But when we hear at the same time in that realm, he's pretty much human-like, we start to feel him close again. The point here is the following. When we conceive God as God, that's the presentation of the devotional Vedanta of India, most probably you may think of him in awe and reverence, some type of majestic expression. God is very big, I'm very small, some distance is there. So the relationship will be in those terms, not in intimate terms, but with certain distance, awareness of God's divinity. And that's okay. I mean, we are not criticizing that, but we are just presenting an interesting alternative to that expression of the divinity. Because again, for us, God's is infinite, and hopefully for everyone who is really believing in God and having that experience. And if someone is infinite, it will have infinite expressions of his personality. In the very same way, we have different expressions in a much more limited expression of it. So I will be different in front of my grandmother, in front of my sister. I will be a different person. I will take a different form, if you will, a different presentation. So the same applies with God. This is a very nice idea, which I speak to us of God being influenced, but not by material energy, the ones that puts us in what we call illusion, but he's influenced by the power of spiritual love that is in his own heart, and it's shared with his intimate servants. So it's to speak about the glory of God. I mean, he's pretty much open and sensitive to the power of the experience of love that makes him much more than what he is already. We speak of God, we speak about the one being that already is everything that one could conceive of more. But the nature of, again, infinities, it keeps growing. The nature of love is it keeps growing. And different types of love are there, directed towards the divine. So according to each particular type of love, the divine will adopt a particular presentation. Because of this, we spoke about emotional moments in the life of the Absolute. So there is a particular approach to the divinity where there is not so much that majesty, but there's much more intimacy without transgressing the majestic aspect of God. So it receives the names of Krishna. In one of the names, Krishna means supremely attractive, and it speaks of the principle of beauty, and how beauty in itself represents the ultimate principle of attraction. There's a concept in Sanskrit called rasa. Rasa means aesthetics, sacred static rapture. And it speaks about how aesthetics and beauty in a sacred context, it takes ourselves fully, it captures ourselves. And what to speak if that's connected with God. So the Upanishads very ancient texts in India say Rasu Vaisaha Rasamhi Vayam Ladvanandi Bhavati. It says the absolute God is in itself rasa, sacred aesthetic rapture, and only by tasting that rasa the soul can reach its ultimate happiness. So this idea of God as being more human-like, it has to do with himself. The idea of God has to do with oneself as a cosmic administrator, as the president in the Congress, in the White House or whatever. But what happens when the president goes home? At home, he's no longer the president. He's the president, but it's a secondary designation. At home, the president will be his wife's husband, and maybe his grandson will be waiting for him, thinking in terms of, oh, grandpa is coming. And when grandpa enters, he will jump onto him and say, I want you to move like a snake. So the president of the States will be like moving in the crooked way on the floor by the force and the strength of the 5-year-old boy. So the love is much more powerful than his position as a president. That's the idea. So at home, he's himself, and he's much more satisfied with that interaction. And everyone is there. He's much more satisfied. When he returns to his job, he's the president, he's in charge, it takes a much more superficial type of approach and relationship. So we could apply that example on one level to the manifestations of divinity. When we approached God, just as seeing him as God, not concerned about his own personal, intimate life, you can have some distance, and again, that's okay. In Indian tradition, even that's an eternal option. You can go and have that eternal connection with divinity, and that's blissful, and that's nice. But again, there are some other mystics who had been attracted to the idea of having God deprived, free of that covering, if you will, of majesty, and being himself at home in the intimacy of that, still being the divine, still being infinite, but being influenced and covered by such a love, as the case of the president with his grandson, that he starts to act and behave in a different way, while still being who he is at work, if you will. So in these presentations also receives the name of aprakrita, which means something that seems to be ordinary and mundane, prakrita, but aprakrita means in a closer look, you realize that's super transcendental. That's not mundane, that's not even transcendental, that's even one says beyond that. This concept will be like speaking about God beyond God. Well, when God takes a rest from his job as divine cosmic administrator and wants to be himself at home. And from that perspective, he expresses in a human-like form, and that creates much more empathy with our human emotions. It is said that all our human emotions, in one sense, are a very diluted reflection of what we can experience in transcendence, in this type of connection with this type of manifestation of the divine. So from this point is that I am speaking here, or I would like to present this opportunity of the idea of divine humanism. When we get both sides, both divinity and humanity, both sides getting closer to each other to reach this point of meeting. Because of this, I'm speaking in terms of divine humanism and how to humanize humanity and how to make humanity divine. Well, a very interesting approach will be to humanize divinity. It still will be divinity, but with a human touch that naturally will allow us to feel much more at home and closer to that. So I feel that nowadays, in the ages we are living now, it's quite necessary to update, if you will, the metaphorical presentation of God, of a dynamic conception of the divine that has always been there, but the presentation of the idea should be properly conceived and presented with an open mind and understand from different angles of view. And also, not only theology, but psychology could help in that regard, being psychology a pretty much human art or science, as we would like. how to understand, how to connect to the psychology of God. Psychology is something that could be applied to God's mind, to theology, and vice versa. From the theological field, we could conceive how to conceive and present an expression of the absolute that may fit well with our psychology, and at the same time not limiting the absolute, but giving or bridging the gap between both of those sides. So some ideas I would like to share to you today with all of you regarding divine humanism.